Along the jagged coastline of Maine, where the Atlantic Ocean crashes endlessly against stone and steel. There are long arms of rock reaching into the sea. Built to protect harbors from storms. Built to hold back the oceana's fury. Built by men who worked through freezing nights, violent waves, and constant danger. But the sea remembers everything. When storms roll in after dark, the breakwaters come alive. Waves slam with unnatural force. Footsteps echo on slick stone where no one should be standing. And voices carry through the wind, calling from the edge of the water. Some workers were swept away while building them. Some fishermen never made it back to shore. Some ships shattered against these barriers, leaving souls trapped between land and sea. Tonight, we stand at the edge of the Atlantic. Listening to the wind howl through salt and fog. As we explore the most haunted storm-lashed breakwaters in Maine. Places where the ocean never forgives. And where something still walks the stones when the storm arrives. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly grateful you are here with me tonight. I hope you are somewhere warm and dry, because the places we are about to visit are cold, wet, and unforgiving. Maine's coastline is beautiful. But it is also one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the world. For centuries, fishermen, sailors, and harbor workers have battled storms here. Breakwaters were built to protect ports and towns. The work was deadly. Men slipped on ice-covered rocks. Waves swept workers into the sea. Entire crews were lost when storms struck without warning. Some breakwaters were built over shipwrecks. Some sit near mass graves of sailors. And some have histories so dark that locals refuse to walk them after sunset. Visitors today report hearing boots on stone behind them. Seeing figures standing at the far end, staring out to sea. And feeling sudden, powerful urges to step closer to the edge. Before we walk onto the rocks, let me ask you something. If you were standing on a breakwater during a storm and saw a human figure waving to you from the far end, would you walk closer to help or turn back immediately? Now take a slow breath. Listen to the wind. And let us begin our journey along the haunted storm-lashed breakwaters of Maine. On a desolate stretch of coastline stands the Black Tide Breakwater. It is a massive, crumbling arm of stone, built a century ago to protect a harbor that now sits empty. The sea has reclaimed its domain, leaving the breakwater as a lonely, monolithic ruin stretching hundreds of yards into the surf. Its most notable feature is a permanent, deep dampness. Even on the hottest, stillest days, when the sea is a flat, oily calm, the stones of the breakwater are slick and dark with moisture, as if weeping from within. No sun can dry it. No wind can warm it. As night falls, the breakwater's true character emerges. The sea might be placid everywhere else along the shore, but here, waves begin to strike the stone. They are not random surges, but rhythmic, measured impacts. They hit with the regularity of a slow, heavy heartbeat, or more unsettlingly, like the footsteps of a giant walking alongside the structure. The sound, a deep, resonant thud followed by a hiss of retreating foam, paces from the seaward end toward the shore, as if something is striding the length of the breakwater, inspecting its walls. But the most distressing phenomenon is auditory. Above the rhythmic thud of the waves and the sigh of the retreating water, visitors hear other sounds. They are the unmistakable, visceral sounds of a person in respiratory distress. A wet, ragged coughing, followed by the desperate, choking gasp for air that cannot be found. These sounds do not come from the air or the surface, but seem to rise from directly beneath the walkway. From the tangled maze of submerged rocks and cold, black water at the breakwater's base. They are faint, yet piercingly clear, carrying a horrifying intimacy that cuts through the noise of the sea. The history of the breakwater is written in engineering failure and human cost. It was built during a frenzied period of port expansion. Using a novel, and as it turned out, flawed, method of submerged crib work. During a brutal winter storm not long after its completion, a section of the foundation, weakened by the relentless pressure, collapsed. A night watchman, a man named Carrick, who was making his rounds checking for storm damage, was on that section when it gave way. He was thrown into the violent, freezing water amidst the tumbling stones. Trapped in the dark, air-filled cavities of the collapsing cribwork. His final moments were a frantic struggle against both the sea and the very structure he was tasked to guard. His body was recovered days later, but the breakwater was deemed too damaged and too dangerous to repair fully. The permanent dampness defies meteorological explanation. Core samples show no freshwater spring beneath it. The stones are not a different composition from the dry shore. Yet, they perpetually sweat. The rhythmic waves are equally perplexous. Tide charts and wave monitors confirm that the sea state at the breakwater is often calmer than the sounds would suggest. The impacts seem to be generated from below the waterline, not from incoming swells. The coughing and choking sounds, when captured on highly sensitive underwater microphones, are the most troubling evidence. Audio analysis reveals they are complex waveforms, not the simple gurgle of water in a hole. They contain the acoustic signatures of genuine human vocal distress, though filtered and distorted by water and stone. Skeptics propose the sounds are caused by air being forced through specific narrow gaps in the cribwork as water pressures change, a sort of stone lung. But to the human listener, the interpretation is instantaneous and horrifying. To walk the black tide breakwater at night is to traverse a line between the solid and the suffocating. The damp stones chill your feet through your shoes. The rhythmic thumping footsteps in the water keep pace with you. And beneath it all, the sounds of a final, losing battle for breath rise from the dark. It is not a haunting of a ghost that walks, but of a ghost that drowns, over and over. The breakwater is not just a structure, it is a grave and a memorial. The dampness is its perpetual cold sweat. The rhythmic waves are the echo of the collapse, the footsteps of the disaster itself. And the choking sounds are the last, desperate language of a man who was consumed by his post, a sound forever trapped in the labyrinth of stone, waiting for the quiet of night to rise and remind the living of the cold, dark, and airless price of a foundation that could not hold. On a stark and storm-battered coastline lies a geological formation known as Widowa Reach. It is a long, narrow spit of black rock, like a skeletal finger pointing into the most treacherous stretch of the North Atlantic. For generations, this reach provided the only deep-water access for the village clinging to the cliffs above. It was also a gauntlet. Navigating the channel alongside the reach required perfect timing and nerve, as hidden reefs waited just beneath the churning surface. Many boats, and many fishermen, were lost here. The rock is stained with salt and memory. The village survived, but it is a place marked by absence. The houses look out to sea with window eyes that have watched too many storms. And on certain evenings, when the light is failing and the wind has a particular mournful note, a figure appears. She stands at the very tip of Widowa Reach, where the rock gives way to crashing spray. She is always described similarly, a woman in dark, heavy clothing, like the mourning dresses of a century past. Her shawl pulled tight against the gale that never seems to touch her. She faces the open ocean, a still and silent sentinel against the raging gray. She is seen from the cliffs above or from boats cautiously skirting the channel. A known marker, a part of the Landscapia's sad folklore. But she is not a statue. The compelling detail, the one that drives the legend, is what happens when someone attempts to reach her. Concerned for her safety, or driven by a need to know, a villager or visitor will make the arduous climb down the cliff path and venture onto the rocky spit. They will pick their way across the slippery stone, the cold sea wind tearing at their clothes. They will keep their eyes fixed on the dark, still figure at the end. And she will vanish. Not by walking away, not by fading slowly. She is there, and then in the blink of an eye, she is not. The spot where she stood is empty, just wet rock and sky. It is at this moment, as the would-be rescuer stands baffled on the lonely reach, that the sound comes. It is the sound of a woman sobbing. Not the loud, ragged sound of immediate grief, but the exhausted, hopeless weeping of someone who has cried for a very long time. The sound does not come from any specific direction. It is carried on the wind, woven into the hiss of the spray, and the moan of the air through the rocks. It surrounds the listener for a handful of seconds, before the wind steals it away, leaving only the natural roar of the sea. The history of the village provides names but no single story. There was not one widow, but many. Over the decades, so many women lost husbands, fathers, and sons to widow's reach, that their collective vigil became a village trait. They would gather on the cliffs, or later, dare to walk the reach itself, staring at the horizon for a sail that would never appear. The figure is not thought to be a specific ghost, but a manifestation of that collective grief. A silhouette formed from generations of loss. She wears the timeless dress of mourning because she is mourning itself, given a shape. Paranormal theorists call this a thought form, an entity created not by a single death, but by a repeated, powerful emotional pattern. The strength of so many women's focused sorrow, directed at the same deadly stretch of water, may have conjured this permanent watcher. Her disappearance when approached is key. She is not a person to be saved. She is an echo of the act of watching. You cannot comfort an echo. You can only witness it, and then hear the sorrow that built it, carried on the very wind that carried away the voices of the lost. To see the figure on Widow's Reach is to see the landscape's memory of its own cost. The black rock, the cold water, the howling wind, they are the constants. The woman in dark clothing is the human element, forever etched into the scene. She does not beckon or warn. She simply stands, embodying the hope that turned to habit, and the habit that turned into a permanent part of the view. The lesson of Widow's Reach is one of collective sorrow. Some places absorb not just individual stories, but the shared emotional weight of a community. The sound of sobbing on the wind is not a haunting of the dead, but a haunting by the living who were left behind. Their tears now a permanent feature of the weather, and their silent, dark vigil forever waiting at the end of the stone finger. And gave only this enduring, heartbreaking silhouette in return. On a jagged, wind-scoured point of land that juts defiantly into the northern sea, there stands a crumbling breakwater. It is not a work of modern engineering, but an ancient, brute-force attempt to tame the waves. Massive, dark stones are piled high. And driven deep into the heart of this rock pile are iron chains. They are not merely draped over the stones, but fused into them by decades of rust and corrosion. Their links as thick as a man's forearm. They emerge from the rock at strange angles, vanish into the stone again, and reappear farther down, like the metal veins of the promontory itself. In calm weather, the chains are silent monuments to forgotten industry. But when a storm gathers, when the sky turns the color of lead, and the sea begins to heave and roar, the chains do not just clank. They rattle with a furious, shaking violence. A sound that cuts through the thunder of the surf. It is the sound of immense strain, of shackles testing their limits. The chains whip and shudder against the rock, throwing off flakes of rust like dark snow, their movement seemingly impossible given how deeply anchored they appear to be. It is during these tempests, when brave or foolhardy souls venture too close to witness the spectacle, that the more intimate stories emerge. Some who have stood on the lower, wave-lashed stones claim to have felt a sudden, cold, constricting pressure around an ankle. It is brief, lasting only a second, a sensation of a heavy, wet loop of iron tightening like a snare before immediately going slack. There is never a mark, never a bruise, only the visceral, unforgettable memory of that momentary grip. A geologist named Martin was studying coastal erosion patterns. The iron chain breakwater fascinated him as a case study in metal degradation within a marine environment. He viewed the storm stories as superstition born from the frightening power of the place. He secured permission to install stress gauges and movement sensors on several of the chains, timing his research to coincide with the forecast of a sizable autumn gale. As the storm hit, his instruments went wild. The chains were not just vibrating from wave impact. They were exhibiting complex, torsional movements independent of the direct force of the water. Huddled in a sheltered observation hut, Martin watched through reinforced glass as a particularly large wave submerged the lower third of the breakwater. In the swirling, chaotic foam, he swore he saw a length of chain lift from the rock, coil in the air for an instant, and then slam down again. Driven by a need for ground truth, he suited up in a heavy weather rig and, during a temporary lull, ventured onto the safer, upper rocks to check a sensor. Ventured onto the safer, upper rocks to check a sensor. A follow-up wave, larger than expected, crashed over the lower stones. The roar was immense, and the rattling of the chains became a deafening shriek of metal on stone. At that moment, he felt it. A swift, powerful cinch of cold around his right ankle, above his boot. It was not the pull of water. It was a defined, circular pressure that contracted and then vanished. He stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sensor he had been checking was now bent at a strange angle. His subsequent historical research uncovered the breakwater's origin. It was not built to protect a harbor. It was built to anchor something. Centuries ago, this point was used to moor the great prison hulks, decommissioned ships that housed convicts awaiting transport. The ships were chained to the land here, in this exposed, miserable spot, where the constant violence of the sea was considered part of the sentence. The chains in the rock are the land anchors for those vanished ships. Martin now believes the breakwater does not remember a storm. It remembers being a tether. The rattling is not just physics. It is the echo of every chain strain from every ship trying to break free in a gale. The momentary tightening around an ankle is not a malicious act. It is a reflexive, remembered action. It is the chain's ingrained purpose, to bind, to secure, to hold fast against tremendous force, manifesting for a split second upon any contact. He published his corrosion data. His personal conclusion remains private. They understand that the chains are not inanimate. They are dormant, and a storm wakes them up, not to harm, but to practice their sole function, to grip, to hold, to endure. And in that furious, rattling dance, they momentarily mistake a living ankle for a ship's hull, a rock, or an old iron ring, performing their duty with a blind, relentless loyalty that outlasts the ships, the prisoners, and the very reason they were put there. Fog Bell Point juts into the sea like a sentinel, its cliffs battered by relentless waves and shrouded in mist. Once, a massive warning bell stood at the edge, alerting passing ships of the jagged rocks below. Though the bell was removed decades ago, locals claim that during heavy fog, its sound still echoes across the cliffs and water. The tolls always come in groups of 3, spaced evenly, as if a careful hand guides each strike, keeping time with the rhythm of the ocean. Travelers approaching the point on fog-laden nights often speak of a sudden hush that falls over the cliffs. The wind dies down, the waves soften, and the landscape becomes eerily quiet. In this stillness, the 3 tolls ring out, clear and resonant, seeming to emanate from the very rocks themselves. Seeming to emanate from the very rocks themselves. The sound carries over the mist, vibrating through the bone, filling the air with a sense of urgency and melancholy. Filling the air with a sense of urgency and melancholy. Those who have walked along the cliff paths report that the fog thickens around them during the Bella tolls. It rises from the waves and seems to envelop the observer, muffling all other sound and isolating them in a world of white and gray. The rhythm of the tolls is hypnotic, each strike echoing long after it ends, leaving a lingering resonance that seems to stretch time itself. Some claim to see shadowy figures in the fog, always just at the edge of vision. They are fleeting, appearing only when the bell tolls and vanishing immediately afterward. The figures are often described as sailors or lighthouse keepers, their forms shrouded in mist and their faces indistinct. Many feel that these apparitions are tied to the bell, spirits bound to its sound, endlessly repeating the warning they once gave to the living. Visitors report a physical sensation accompanying the tolls, a subtle pressure on the chest and a cold draft that moves against the wind. It is as if the cliffs themselves are breathing in rhythm with the bell, exhaling mist and echoing the toll in sympathetic resonance. Some describe a faint vibration beneath their feet, matching the cadence of the 3 strikes, as though the entire point is alive with memory. Local stories tell of ships that once wrecked despite the Bella's warning. Those who perished are said to wander Fog Bell Point, their spirits unable to move on, tied to the tolling sound that marks the treacherous cliffs. Fishermen and hikers alike have reported the feeling of being watched while the bell tolls, a presence lingering just beyond the fog, unseen but unmistakably real. The fog itself seems drawn to the tolls, thickening and swirling with every strike. Shapes emerge and dissolve in the mist, hints of masts, ropes, and figures moving in silent procession. Some visitors have claimed that the sound guides them along the paths, a spectral navigation aid leading them safely away from the cliffs. Others feel compelled to stop and listen, unable to move until the 3 tolls have passed, as though the bell demands respect and attention even now. Even during the day, when the fog is absent, the point carries a residual tension. The cliffs are jagged and unforgiving, and the absence of the bell seems almost palpable. On stormy afternoons, when the clouds roll low and the sea churns, some say they can hear a faint echo, the ghost of the bell tolling in sympathy with the wind and waves. It is never as loud as the full sound in heavy fog, but it carries the same pattern, 3 deliberate strikes that resonate through the air and cliffs. The tolling is not always predictable. Some nights are silent, the fog heavy but still. While other nights bring a chorus of 3 clear strikes that begin suddenly and vanish just as abruptly. Those who are unprepared often report a visceral shock. The sound seeming impossibly near and impossibly far at the same time. It is said that the bell chooses who will hear it, calling to some and ignoring others. Its purpose inscrutable and deliberate. Those brave enough to linger at Fog Bell Point describe a sense of timelessness, as though the tolls have been repeating for centuries, echoing across generations. The tolls have been repeating for centuries, echoing across generations. Each toll carries a warning, a memory, and a lingering sorrow that resonates deep within anyone who hears it. Fog Bell Point is more than a location, it is a nexus of history, memory, and spectral resonance. The bell, though long gone, continues to mark the cliffs with its rhythmic warning. A sound that refuses to be forgotten. Each 3-fold toll connects the living with the past, blending the natural and supernatural into a single, immersive experience. To hear the bell is to stand at the edge of time, listening to the voices of the lost. And feeling the weight of centuries of warnings carried on the wind and through the fog. For those who walk the point at night, the experience lingers long after they leave. The echo of 3 tolls seems to follow. A phantom rhythm that returns in dreams and memories. Fog Bell Point is a place where the past never fully leaves. And where the sound of a bell continues to ring. Guiding, warning, and reminding all who listen. Of the dangers that lie in the mist and on the rocks below. The Bella S sound is a pulse, a heartbeat of the point itself, a rhythmic reminder. A rhythmic reminder that some places are not fully governed by the living. To the sailors long gone, to the wandering dead, and to the visitors brave enough to stand among the cliffs in the fog. And to the visitors brave enough to stand among the cliffs in the fog. And ensuring that Fog Bell Point's warning endures for all time. On the northernmost tip of the Gales Point Peninsula, a massive concrete breakwater known as the Cold Spray Wall stands sentinel against the fury of the winter sea. It is a brutal, functional structure, a sheer vertical face that takes the full force of the Arctic storms. In the heart of winter, when gales drive freezing spray across the bay, a remarkable transformation occurs. The wall becomes a canvas of ice. Layer upon layer of saltwater freezes upon contact, building elaborate, swirling sculptures of rime and glaze ice. It becomes a cliff of frozen waves, a gleaming, opaque fortress several feet thick. It is on these mornings, after a night of particularly violent weather, that the phenomenon is discovered. As the storm abates and the first gray light filters through the scudding clouds, explorers who brave the icy winds find handprints etched into the frost on the wall. They are not smudges or random marks, but perfect, crisp impressions of human hands, fingers splayed, palms pressed flat against the ice as if someone had steadied themselves against the frozen surface. They appear at various heights, some low to the ground, others higher up, suggesting a person climbing or bracing against the wind. The ice within the prints is as if the heat of a living hand had momentarily melted the surface frost before it refroze. The handprints are fleeting. They exist only in the brief window between the end of the storm and the rising of the winter sun. The moment direct sunlight, or even a significant brightening of the diffuse daylight, touches the wall, the prints vanish. They do not melt and drip away slowly, they simply disappear, as if the ice that held their shape reverts instantly to the uniform texture of the surrounding frost. No photograph has ever fully captured their eerie clarity, as the light needed to photograph them is the very thing that erases them from existence. The history of the Cold Spray Wall is one of grim necessity and sacrifice. It was built to protect a vital lighthouse and its keepers from being swept away by storm surges. The construction, conducted over 2 brutal winters, was perilous. Men worked in harnesses on the exposed face, securing forms and pouring concrete in fleeting windows of calm. The most dangerous task belonged to the ice knockers, whose job was to clear accumulating ice from the lighthouse lantern and the catwalks using long poles. They would often have to traverse sections of the breakwater itself. The history of the Cold Spray Wall is one of grim necessity and sacrifice. The central story involves a keeper named Hollis. During a catastrophic Christmas storm, the lighthouse's mechanisms iced over. Hollis, fearing a ship would be lost without the beacon, ventured onto the breakwater to try and clear a view for a backup lamp. He was last seen by the other keepers, a dark shape against the white spray, making his way hand over hand along the icy wall, searching for purchase. His body was found at the base of the wall when the storm cleared, frozen solid. The official report stated he was swept away by a wave. But the other keepers whispered that he had simply become part of the ice. His final, desperate grips preserved in the very medium that took his life. Modern science offers explanations that only deepen the mystery. The specific salinity and consistency of the sea spray, combined with the wall's temperature and texture, can create unique crystalline formations. Some physicists suggest that wind patterns during a storm might, through a complex process of differential freezing and sublimation, etch patterns that resemble handprints. The instant vanishing could be due to a thin, photothermal layer of ice that undergoes a rapid phase change with minimal energy input. Yet, these theories cannot explain the consistent human morphology of the prints, their varied placement, or why they appear only after the most violent storms. To witness the Cold Spray Wall after a winter night's fury is to see a world remade in ice. The silence after the storm is profound, broken only by the groan of shifting ice. And the distant crash of waves. Discovering the handprints in that stillness is a chilling, intimate moment. They feel less like a haunting and more like a fossil, a cryogenic memory captured in frozen salt water. They are a testament to the human struggle against an indifferent element. The prints do not move, they do not speak. They simply appear, a final record of contact. Of a man trying to hold on against the freezing, relentless force of the sea. And then, as if the memory is too painful to hold in the light, the sun reaches the wall, and the evidence of that struggle is gently, completely, erased. Leaving only the smooth, cold expanse, waiting for the next storm to write its story again in frost and fleeting, frozen hands. On a desolate stretch of coastline, where cliffs of ancient granite meet the relentless assault of the sea, there is a place known as Split Stone Reach. It is a fortress of rock, scarred and polished by millennia of waves. And at its heart, a geological wound. A massive, clean crack, 20 feet tall and just wide enough for a person to enter, splits the cliff face from its base upward. The edges are sharp, the interior lost in profound shadow. This is a place where the earth itself seems to have been torn open. The first sign of its strangeness is not sight, but feeling. Even on the hottest summer day, a stream of cold air flows from the narrow opening. It is not a breeze. It is a constant, gentle exhalation, carrying the deep, mineral chill of buried stone. And a faint, clean scent of wet earth untouched by sun. To stand before the crack is to feel this cold breath washing over you, a persistent whisper of temperature from the Islanda's hidden interior. On foggy mornings, the breath becomes visible, a pale plume drifting from the stone like a sigh. But the true mystery of Split Stone Reach is auditory. If you stand close to the opening, particularly in the quiet hour before dusk, you begin to hear the voices. They are not loud, but they are clear, echoing up from the impenetrable darkness within the crack. They are whispers, layered and soft, as if many people are speaking confidentially just out of sight. The words are often indistinct, a murmur of lost conversation. Yet, listeners consistently report hearing one thing with chilling clarity: names. The whispers speak names. Old-fashioned names, like Alastair, or Eleanor, or Jonah. Sometimes a single name is repeated by different whispering tones. These are not the names of local legends or famous shipwrecks recorded in the town hall. They feel random, personal, and utterly disconnected from any known history of the coast. The history that is known is one of silence. This stretch of coast has no safe harbor. For centuries, it was a graveyard for ships blown off course. The village records, what few survived a fire long ago, speak of a terrible winter storm in the 1700s that claimed an entire fleet of fishing vessels from a neighboring district. No bodies from that disaster were ever recovered. The sea took them, and the cliffs kept their secrets. The crack in the stone, geologists confirm, is likely the result of that same historic storm's fury, a bolt of seismic energy released as the waves pounded the bedrock. This convergence of geology and tragedy provides a framework for understanding. Parapsychologists and experts in earth mysteries propose that the cataclysmic event, the storm and the simultaneous fracturing of the stone, created a unique recording. The intense, collective energy of so many lives lost at once, combined with the physical trauma to the land, may have imprinted upon the very rock. The crack is not just a fissure, it is a seam between realities, a fault line in time. The cold air is explained as a simple physical phenomenon, air cooled in deep subterranean channels being forced to the surface. But the whispering voices defy such logic. They could be a form of auditory pareidolia, the mind interpreting the complex sounds of wind and water echoing in a deep, resonant stone chamber as speech. Yet the specificity of the names challenges that. Some believe the split in the stone acts as a natural speaker. To stand before Split Stone Reach is to stand at a raw edge. The cold breath is the land's respiration. The whispering names are its memory, a library of the lost spoken in a language of echoes. It is not a haunted place in the traditional sense. There are no apparitions, no pleas for help. It is a place of documentation. The crack is an archive, and the cold air flowing from it turns the pages, reading aloud. The endless, silent registry of those who vanished into the sea's maw, giving them back only the faint, echoing currency of their own names. It serves as a stark, natural memorial. The reach does not offer comfort or closure. The sea giveth not, but the stone, split asunder, remembereth. In its cold breath and whispered roll call, it forces a reminder that every empty horizon has a name, and some wounds in the earth are deep enough to weep the memory of those who were swallowed by the adjacent deep. At the furthest reach of a long, granite breakwater, where the last human stone meets the endless fury of the open ocean, a single iron post stands against the elements. This is Lantern End. The post is all that remains of a navigational beacon, its lantern housing long since ripped away by a legendary storm, leaving only a skeletal armature of rusted metal. The walk to it is treacherous, a half-mile of slick, wave-washed rock, and it is a journey few make by day, and almost none dare after dark. For after midnight, when the tide is high and the wind often carries the taste of rain, a light appears at the top of the broken post. It is not the bright, white flash of a modern beacon, but a dim, struggling yellow glow, like the flame of a guttering candle encased in fogged glass. It flickers inconsistently, sometimes almost dying out before flaring again, fighting a battle against the damp sea air. It casts no useful beam, only a small, trembling halo of light on the wet rock immediately below it. It is within this faint, unstable circle that the figures manifest. They do not walk down the breakwater. They are simply there, assembled beneath the post, as if they have gathered for a meeting. They appear as darker shapes within the night and spray, lacking detail, but clearly human in form. There are never many, perhaps 3 or 4. They do not move about. They stand in a loose, silent cluster, facing each other, or looking out to sea. They exist only within that pathetic sphere of lantern light. After a few minutes, as suddenly as they appeared, they are gone. Not by walking away, but by dissolving. One moment they are solid silhouettes against the flicker, the next, a particularly thick veil of ocean spray washes across the point, and when it clears, the figures have vanished. The dim light may linger a moment longer, or it may snuff out immediately, leaving the end of the breakwater to the darkness and the crashing waves. Leaving the end of the breakwater to the darkness and the crashing waves. A historian named Eerie was researching decommissioned coastal aids to navigation. Lantern End was a footnote, a failed beacon noted for its poor location and short service life. Intrigued by the persistent local stories, she decided to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Setting up a night vision camera on a stable section of the breakwater, a few hundred yards from the end. Through the green glow of her monitor, she saw the light flicker to life at 12:17 a.m. It was, as described, a weak and sickly thing. Then, the shapes resolved beneath it. They were static, hauntingly so. They did not fidget or shift. They simply were. Eerie felt a profound sense of intrusion, as if she were spying on a private vigil. A great rolling wave crashed against the seaward side, sending a plume of spray over the point. On her screen, the figures fragmented in the mist, pixelated, and were gone. The light died seconds later. Her research into the Beacona's history revealed a sad, bureaucratic tale. It was built late and poorly. Its light was chronically unreliable, often failing in the worst weather. Within 2 years of its installation, a coastal trader, missing its faint and faltering signal, was driven onto the rocks a mile down the coast. There was no great loss of life, but the ship was a total loss, and its crew and the local fishermen who launched a daring rescue were left shaken. Ilara pieced together the rest from old sailors' home logs. The crew of the wrecked trader, and the fishermen who saved them, would gather at the tavern. They spoke bitterly of the feeble light. After the wreck, they took it upon themselves, a quiet, shared pact, to be the beacon. On rough, moonless nights, several of them would walk out to Lantern End with storm lanterns. They would stand watch in turns, holding their lights aloft, supplementing the failing official beam until the weather cleared or dawn broke. Ilara now believes the figures under the post are not the ghosts of the drowned. The dim, flickering light is not a spectral replay of the broken beacon, but a memory of their handheld lanterns. A silent transfer of duty. Their vanishing into the spray is not a disappearance, but a relief. The next man stepping forward into the circle of light. His form blurred by the very storm he is braving. She never published this addendum to her historical report. Some memorials are not made of stone, but of habit. She understands now why the old fishermen in the port never glanced toward Lantern End on a wild night. They are not afraid. They are respecting the watch. They know the pact is still being honored, long after the ship has rusted away and the men have passed on. The dim light still flickers, and the watchers still gather. Ensuring that on the darkest nights, no one is left waiting for a light that will not come. Sailor's last walk stretches along a jagged coastline where cliffs rise sharply from storm-tossed waters. The path is narrow and treacherous, carved from worn stone and compacted sand, slippery with rain and sea spray. During storms, the wind howls through the crevices, carrying the scent of salt and the distant roar of waves crashing below. But impossible to ignore when the storms roll in. Boot prints appear in the wet sand and soil, perfectly formed and fresh, yet no living person is present. They are the size and shape of a sailor's footwear, deeply impressed into the ground by what seems like deliberate weight and movement. The prints begin at the edge of paths or dunes and lead straight toward the cliffside, unwavering in direction, as though following a predetermined course. Observers report a chilling consistency. The prints never lead back. No matter how far the trail extends. Leaving only the eerie conclusion at the edge. Rain and wind can alter surrounding terrain. Yet the boot prints remain intact. As if shielded from natural elements. The effect is disorienting. Creating a sense that the path exists beyond ordinary time and observation. The coastline itself enhances the impression of finality. Waves crash violently against rocks below, sending up plumes of spray that obscure vision and mask ordinary sounds. Thunder rumbles in the distance, echoing across cliffs, and wind carries voices or whispers that seem to originate from nowhere in particular. The storm amplifies perception, focusing attention on the prints and their direction, making the observer feel the inevitability of the sailor's course. Even when viewed from above or afar, the prints maintain an unnatural clarity. Hikers or storm watchers note the edges of the impressions remain sharply defined, in contrast to surrounding mud or sand that shifts and erodes naturally. The prints are always oriented toward the cliff edge, never deviating, never curving away. Observers describe a sensation of being drawn along the line of footprints, compelled to follow the path that leads inevitably to the precipice. The psychological effect is profound. Awareness of the cliff and the storm heightens fear and anticipation. Each footprint suggests deliberate movement, intent, and resignation. Some report feeling a presence behind them, a silent companion walking parallel, though no form is visible. Peripheral vision catches shadows shifting among rocks or waves, reinforcing the impression that the coastline is inhabited by forces beyond ordinary perception. Fog and mist often accompany storms, adding to disorientation. Shapes along the edge appear to move, then vanish. Waves blend with wind in patterns that mimic footfalls, creating the sensation that motion is continuous and unbroken. Observers often feel their own pulse quicken as they trace the path of prints toward the cliffside, a mix of curiosity and unease compelling them to study the trail while instinct urges caution. The final approach to the cliff is dramatic. Rocks jut from the edge, jagged and uneven. The drop to the ocean below is sheer and unforgiving. The prints terminate at the brink, no indication of return or diversion. Storms swirl around the precipice, gusts tug at clothing and hair. And the roar of the sea drowns ordinary sound. The effect is absolute, a visual and spatial confirmation that the path ends in finality, leaving the mind to reconcile the presence of the prints with the absence of their maker. Weather intensifies perception. Lightning briefly illuminates the coastline, revealing the entire path of prints from dunes or paths to the cliff edge. Rain hammers the ground, yet the impressions remain distinct. Observers often report a shiver of recognition, the undeniable sense that each storm replays the Sailor's final walk, leaving evidence that cannot be explained by human means or conventional logic. Even in calmer weather, traces remain for hours, though fading with sun and wind. Photographs and records confirm the presence of prints that vanish as mysteriously as they appear. Witnesses describe a lingering sense of inevitability, a story written in mud and sand of those who walked willingly to the edge, never to return. The landscape seems to preserve memory, marking the path with precision and permanence that defies ordinary understanding. Sailor's last walk endures as a coastline of mystery and haunting presence. The prints appear and lead to the cliff without deviation. Unaccompanied and yet profoundly purposeful. Storms amplify the perception of motion, sound and finality. Observers leave with a lasting impression of a journey. A journey that is seen but never completed. A trail of evidence that hints at lives interwoven with the relentless edge of land and sea. The stretch remains a place where natural forces and unexplained phenomena converge. Boot prints, wind, rain, and cliffs combine to produce a narrative in stone, mud, and sand. A story that cannot be traced back or reversed. Leaving observers with the knowledge that some paths exist beyond ordinary understanding. Leading to ends that are absolute, inevitable, and unforgettable. Along a rugged stretch of coastline known as the Iron Shore, there stands a sea defense called the Screaming Wave Barrier. It is a series of massive, jagged concrete tetrahedrons, placed decades ago to dissipate the energy of the storm waves before they could erode the cliffs. Unlike the smooth, sloping barriers elsewhere, this one is all sharp angles and hollow chambers. But when waves roll in, even modest swells, the barrier performs its oral alchemy. It is a silent, geometric jungle. But when waves roll in, even modest swells, the barrier performs its oral alchemy. When the sea is calm, it is a silent, geometric jungle. But when waves roll in, even modest swells, the barrier performs its oral alchemy. As water rushes into the narrow gaps and hollows within the concrete blocks, it does not produce the usual deep roar or crash. Instead, the compressed and escaping air creates a high-pitched, wavering shriek. It is a shrill, sustained sound, eerily reminiscent of a human scream, that cuts through the bass rumble of the surf. The sound is directional, seeming to come from the very heart of the barrier. A chorus of anguish sung by stone and seawater. For most, the screaming noise is unsettling enough, a natural but disturbing quirk of acoustics. However, a significant number of visitors report something more complex. They claim to discern words, or fragments of words, woven into the fabric of the sound. The descriptions are never identical, but share common themes. Some hear a repeated name, like Ilara or Jonah. Others report short, desperate phrases, "the words help us" or "too late," or simply the pleading cry of no. These perceived words are not clear shouts, but auditory phantoms. But auditory phantoms. Impressions that form in the listener's mind as the scream peaks and fades, felt more than heard. And always just beyond the edge of certainty. The barrier's history is rooted in a community's grief. The cliffs it protects were once the site of the village of Hale's End, a small fishing community. A legendary storm, the Great Gale, struck with little warning one autumn night. The village was built too close to the edge, and the storm surge, combined with torrential rain, triggered a catastrophic landslide. Several homes and the community hall were swept into the sea. While many escaped, the loss of life was profound, and the names of the lost are memorialized on a plaque further inland. The original sea defenses were inadequate. The current screaming barrier was built years later as a form of penitent engineering. A brutalist apology made of concrete. Almost immediately, fishermen noted the strange sounds it produced. The stories of words within the screams began with the survivors and their descendants, who would visit the barrier and hear, or believe they heard, the names of their loved ones in the wind and water. Acoustic scientists have studied the barrier extensively. Its design is, inadvertently, a perfect sound generator. The rushing water acts like a bow on a string, and the concrete chambers act as a distorted vocal cord. Audiopareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns in random noise. Especially for those who know the tragic history. Yet, audio software has identified recurring, structured patterns in the sound waves that are more consistent with syllabic sounds than with random noise, though they remain indecipherable. To stand before the screaming wave barrier is to witness the sea giving voice to stone. The experience is visceral. You feel the salt spray on your face, hear the deep crash of the waves. And then, cutting through it all, that piercing, human-like shriek. In that moment of primal unease, the mind struggles for meaning. And sometimes, it creates it. The words feel implanted, a direct, mournful communication from the past. The barrier does not simply protect the land, it seems to articulate its memory. It is a monumental instrument played by the tide, and its song is one of loss. Whether the perceived words are a trick of the mind, a geological coincidence, or something more haunting, the effect is indelible. The barrier screams, and in its scream, generations of listeners have heard the echo of names from a memorial plaque, a whispered, watery requiem for a village that slipped into the sea, forever lamenting through concrete and foam. The harbor of the old port town is guarded by a granite breakwater known as the Long Watch. By day, it is a pleasant, if lengthy, promenade. Locals fish from its sides, and visitors stroll to the lighthouse at its end. The stone is warm, the sea air is brisk, and the distance feels perfectly, reassuringly finite. But as the sun dips below the horizon and the harbor lights begin to glow, a subtle transformation occurs. The breakwater changes. At night, the Long Watch earns its name. The walk out to the lighthouse, a clear and measured path in daylight, becomes an exercise in perceptual doubt. The moment you step onto the damp granite blocks after dark, a feeling settles in. The lighthouse beacon, a steady white flash in the distance, seems to recede. The familiar town lights at your back shrink to faint, yellow pinpricks, swallowed by the growing dark. The sound of the waves slapping the stones becomes a monotonous, rhythmic heartbeat, marking a time that feels out of sync with your watch. People walk it for the challenge, for the solitude, or simply because they do not believe the stories. They all report the same uncanny experience. The walk takes far longer than it should. A journey that is 30 minutes in sunlight becomes an hour, then more. Time itself seems to thicken and slow, like cold honey. The stones underfoot, each one roughly the same, create a hypnotic, repetitive pattern that destroys any sense of progress. You walk, and the flashing light remains a distant, mocking eye. Then comes the most disquieting claim. Some visitors, a small but consistent number, swear they never reach the end at all. They report walking for what feels like hours, their legs growing tired, the cold sea wind a constant companion. The lighthouse remains perpetually ahead, the town forever behind. Exhaustion, or a creeping, primal anxiety, eventually forces them to turn back. The return journey, they say, often feels normal, passing in the expected amount of time, as if the breakwater only stretches in one direction, under the cover of darkness. Engineers have surveyed it. The breakwater is exactly 1.2 miles long. There is no curvature, no trick of perspective. Psychologists point to sensory deprivation and monotony. The effect is a known phenomenon called the horizontal vertigo, where a lack of reference points makes a straight line feel endless. But the history of the Long Watch adds a layer of gravity. This breakwater was built after a devastating storm in the late 1800s that breached the old, wooden pier and flooded the town. The chief engineer, a man named Alastair Finch, was obsessed with its strength and length. He believed it must be long enough to stare down the worst of the Atlantica's fury. He spent every evening during its construction walking its growing length, checking each stone, watching the horizon for weather. He died of pneumonia the week it was completed. Some say from his nightly vigils in the wet and cold. His watch, in a sense, never ended. This story of dedication and endless vigilance may be the key to the experience. Theorists of place memory suggest that Alastair Finch's focused, repetitive ritual, his long, slow walks of inspection, imbued the stone with a signature of protracted time. At night, when the conditions match his countless lonely tours, the breakwater replays not his image, but his experience, the feeling of a journey that is more about scrutiny than destination. You are not walking a physical distance, you are walking in the echo of a man's patience. The Long Watch is a temporal illusion, a loop of measured steps etched into granite. It is not dangerous, but it is profoundly persuasive. The lighthouse is always reachable in the light. But in the dark, you contend with the memory of the watchman. His journey was never about arriving, it was about the act of watching itself, an endless task now offered to anyone brave or curious enough to step onto his path after sundown. It teaches a quiet lesson about perspective. Some paths are not just physical, but psychological. The breakwater shows us that distance is a contract between the mind and the world. And in the right conditions, with the right history, that contract can be gently, eerily suspended, leaving you walking an echo, forever halfway between the safety of the shore and the promise of the light. On a stretch of stone that remembers what it is like to watch, and wait, for a very, very long time. Along a desolate stretch of coastline, where cliffs of black basalt plunge into a churning gray sea, there is a place known to sailors and hikers as the Broken Compass Wall. It is not a man-made structure, but a natural barrier, a 2-mile-long escarpment that runs perfectly north-south. The path that skirts its base is the only way forward for miles. And it is here that all modern navigation fails. The phenomenon is immediate and unsettling. As travelers enter the shadow of the wall, the needle of a magnetic compass begins to swim. It does not point south, or to a new north. It spins lazily, or settles into a direction that contradicts every known landmark. Digital compasses in phones and watches flicker between random headings. Cellular signal bars vanish, not gradually, but as if severed by a blade. GPS devices show the traveler as a stationary dot, frozen in place, even as they continue to walk. The world of grids and coordinates simply ends. But the true effect is internal. People report a profound, physiological disorientation. It is not dizziness, but a deep-seated confusion about direction itself. The instinctual sense of forward and backward, of left and right, becomes fluid. Many feel an inexplicable, powerful pull to turn toward the ocean. It feels less like a choice and more like a current, as if the vast, rhythmic breathing of the sea itself is exerting a gentle, undeniable guidance. The mind fights this pull, arguing with the cliffs on one side and the drop on the other. Yet the body feels compelled to listen to the older, deeper magnet of the tide. A geophysicist named Eerie was surveying the region for mineral deposits. Her equipment included sensitive magnetometers and inertial navigation systems. When her team entered the area of the wall, their instruments went into chaos. The magnetometers detected not a single anomaly, but a swirling, chaotic field, as if the bedrock's magnetic memory had been scrambled. Her navigation system, independent of satellites, began to accumulate massive errors. The data was telling her she was walking in circles, while her eyes saw a straight path. It was the human experience that truly convinced her. Standing before the roaring surf, she felt it, a subtle but insistent tug in her chest, a somatic suggestion that the correct path was not along the cliff, but out there, across the water. It felt logical, almost peaceful. To follow it would have been a kind of surrender. She closed her eyes, focused on the solid rock under her boots, and slowly backed away until the feeling receded. Her research into the area's deep history provided a compelling theory. This stretch of coast was a final point of departure for an ancient seafaring people. They did not sail by stars or compasses in their earliest journeys. They sailed by something called wave piloting, a profound, embodied reading of the ocean's swells, currents, and the feel of the sea itself. They learned the ocean's paths by heart, in their bones. The broken compass wall, Eerie believes, sits atop a massive, unique geological formation. That scrambles the magnetic field, a place they may have deliberately used as a training ground. A door to a world without maps. The disorientation modern people feel is not a malfunction. It is an awakening of an older navigation system, buried in human instinct. The pull of the ocean is the echo of that ancient skill. The sea trying to teach its rhythm to those who have forgotten how to listen. The wall is not broken. It is a filter. It strips away the artificial grids of the modern world. The compass and the satellite. And leaves only the primal dialogue between land, sea, and traveler. The pull of the ocean is the echo of that ancient skill, the sea trying to teach its rhythm to those who have forgotten how to listen. Eerie filed a technical report on the anomalous magnetic zones. She never mentioned the feeling in her chest. Some data is subjective, and therefore, to science, invalid. But she understands now why the few hermits who live in caves along this coast navigate by the sun and the sound of the waves. They have accepted the walleyes lesson. They know that in this place, you must let the ocean guide you, not with a map, but with a feeling. To fight it is to be lost. To heed it, however, is not to walk into the waves, but to find a different kind of path. One written not on charts, but in the movement of water, and the tilt of the land. A path that only makes sense when you stop telling the world where you are, and let the world tell you instead. To heed it, however, is not to walk into the waves, but to find a different kind of path, one written not on charts, but in the movement of water and the tilt of the land, a path that only makes sense when you stop telling the world where you are, and let the world tell you instead. Saltbone Breakwater stretches along a rugged coastline, a barrier of jagged stones extending into churning waters. The structure was built to break the force of tides and storms, yet it seems to carry a presence far older than its construction. Waves crash relentlessly against the stones, sending spray into the air and filling the shoreline with the smell of salt and wet rock. The sound is constant, a deep percussion that blends with the wind and distant cries of seabirds. Observers often notice unusual white shapes nestled between the stones. At first, they appear to be fragments of shells or mineral deposits. But closer inspection suggests something more sinister. Some believe the shapes are bones, remnants of creatures long swept into the breakwater by tides or storms. They glint faintly in the sunlight, smooth and weathered, yet their arrangement feels deliberate, as if placed or preserved by forces unseen. The water surrounding the breakwater tastes unusually salty and metallic. Hikers and explorers describe a distinct tang on the lips and tongue, sharper than ordinary seawater. The effect is subtle but persistent, lingering even after leaving the immediate area. Combined with the sight of the white shapes, the metallic flavor creates a sensory impression that the coastline is marked by both physical and unnatural history. Mist often rises from the waves, curling around stones and filling crevices. Visibility is reduced, and the breakwater takes on a spectral quality. Shadows between the rocks appear to shift independently, shapes elongating and contracting with the tide and light. Shadows seem to move at the edge of perception, disappearing when focused on directly, only to reappear moments later in another location. The white forms seem to move at the edge of perception, disappearing when focused on directly, only to reappear moments later in another location. The white forms disappear when focused on directly, only to reappear moments later in another location. The structure itself amplifies sound. Each wave hitting stone produces echoes that bounce along the breakwater and onto the shore. Cracking and shifting of rocks add subtle, rhythmic percussion. Observers report hearing faint scraping or tapping within the gaps between stones, indistinct but persistent, blending with natural sounds to create a layered acoustic environment that feels alive. Time on the breakwater seems altered. Visitors moving along the stones report that distances feel longer than measured. And the rhythm of waves and wind warps perception. Shadows shift in unexpected ways. Light refracts off water and stone to produce illusions of movement. Hikers often pause, sensing something watching, though no figure is visible. The combination of sight, sound, and taste produces a deeply immersive and disorienting experience. The white shapes provoke reflection and unease. Whether bones of animals, remnants of sailors, or something else entirely, they suggest a history intertwined with water, storm, and loss. They appear in clusters and solitary fragments, sometimes partially submerged by tide or debris. Observers often feel compelled to follow their arrangement along the breakwater, a silent path that leads toward the water, yet offers no resolution or explanation. Even on calm days, the area retains a sense of vigilance. Gentle waves expose the white forms, and wind shifts carry a faint metallic tang. Shadows between the stones produce fleeting impressions of movement. The sound of water striking rocks resonates with unusual clarity. The breakwater feels sentient, responding to the presence of visitors with subtle adjustments in light, sound, and atmosphere. Fog and twilight intensify the experience. Shapes between stones are obscured. The metallic taste of water becomes more pronounced. Observers describe the sensation of temperature shift. A subtle chill that seems to rise from the rocks and water combined. The breakwater becomes a liminal space. A place where natural and unnatural forces converge. And perception is heightened. Hikers and explorers often report a sense of continuity with the past. The white forms, the metallic water, and the rhythmic crash of waves evoke centuries of interaction between humans, animals, and the sea. Stories circulate of sailors lost to storms, of animals swept from cliffs, and of objects left behind by tides. Yet nothing is confirmed. The breakwater preserves a narrative without words, a record in stone, water, and sensory impression. Even when leaving the area, visitors carry with them the taste, the sound, and the image of white shapes nestled between rocks. The experience lingers as a memory, a combination of natural and uncanny elements that cannot be fully explained. The coastline remains unchanged, yet each visit feels unique, as if the breakwater records presence, movement, and attention. Saltbone Breakwater endures as a place of mystery and Quiet intensity, the metallic water hints at the unusual. And the sounds of waves and shifting stone create a living rhythm. Visitors encounter a landscape that is both familiar and uncanny, a site where perception, memory, and environment converge to produce an experience that is immersive, unsettling, and unforgettable. On a remote and rocky section of coastline stands the breakwater known as the Calling Spray. It is an old and crumbling structure, a long arm of tumbled granite boulders that reaches into a particularly treacherous channel. The sea here is cold and restless, and the weather can shift with frightening speed. The breakwater itself is unremarkable by day, a wet and slippery path for the occasional brave angler. But under certain conditions, it becomes the stage for a deeply unsettling atmospheric phenomenon. It begins with the mist. Without warning, on otherwise clear days, a thick, cold fog will rise from the surface of the sea directly around the breakwater. It does not roll in from the horizon, but seems to boil up from the water itself, enveloping the stones in a dense, white silence within minutes. The temperature drops noticeably. Visibility shrinks to a few feet, and the world reduces to the sound of water lapping against the wet rock and the mournful cry of a distant gull. Then, the voices begin. They are faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind. But they solidify into clear, human calls. The tone is never shouted, but weak, desperate, and exhausted, as if the speakers have been calling for a very long time. The words are simple, repetitive. Help me. Over here. Please. The voices are not unified, they seem to come from different points within the mist, some closer, some farther out to sea. They are carried on the damp air, directionless and haunting. They sound male and female, young and old, a chorus of pleas that fade in and out with the shifting fog. As quickly as it arrived, the mist will often dissipate, burned away by a sudden shaft of sunlight or scattered by a change in the wind. With it, the voices vanish, leaving behind only the normal sounds of the coast and a profound, eerie silence in their wake. The history of this channel is a ledger of maritime disaster. For centuries, before modern navigation, this was a notorious ship trap. Hidden rocks just below the surface, combined with fierce cross-currents, claimed countless vessels, from fishing boats to merchant schooners. The breakwater was built in a late attempt to mark the worst of the hazards, but for many, it was too little, too late. Local archives are filled with accounts of shipwrecks where survivors clung to the rocks for hours, their calls for help muffled by the ever-present sea spray and wind, until the cold tide eventually claimed them. The phenomenon of the calling spray has been documented for over a century. Lifeboat crews from the Nautica Mission station nearby were the first to formally report it. Mistaking the sounds for a genuine distress call and launching into the fog. Only to find an empty sea. They came to know it as a warning sign of changing weather. But also as something more, a recurring echo of the channel's tragic past. Modern meteorological studies show that the conditions are unique. A specific alignment of cold water upwelling, warmer air, and the precise shape of the breakwater creates a localized and rapid advection fog. Audio analysts have tried to capture the voices. The recordings are enigmatic, often capturing what sounds like vocalizations, but the waveforms are chaotic, blurred by wind and water noise. Skeptics argue it is the sound of seals, or the wind whistling through fissures in the breakwater stones, shaped by the listener's expectation. Yet, those who have heard it, including seasoned sailors unfamiliar with the legend, insist on the human quality of the pleas. To experience the calling spray is to be shrouded in a living memory. The sudden fog isolates you from the modern world, pulling you back into a timeless, gray void. And in that void, the past seems to speak. The desperate voices are not aggressive, but pitiful, the sound of hope fraying into the cold air. It feels less like a haunting and more like a residual broadcast, a psychic imprint of final, unanswered calls that have saturated the very air and water of this place. The breakwater stands as a marker, not just of rock, but of loss. The mist is the breath of the drowned. And the voices are their last, persistent signal. Forever repeating into the wind. A sorrowful chorus forever on the verge of being heard. And forever just out of reach. Along a remote and rugged coastal highway, known as the Cliffside Run, there is a notorious section called the Widowmaker Stones. It is a place where the road is carved directly into a sheer face of dark granite, overlooking a violent stretch of ocean far below. But that determination came at a terrible cost. Construction in the early 1900s was perilous. Men worked with dynamite, jackhammers, and sheer muscle, suspended by ropes on the cliff face. The accidents were sudden, brutal, and final. The exact number is lost. But the name, Widowmaker Stones, etched itself into the landscape as a permanent, grim memorial. The stretch is dangerous even today, prone to rockfalls and slick with sea spray. But its modern legend is born from what is seen during storms. When the Pacific hurls itself against the cliffs, and the wind screams through the guardrails, observers from the safe vantage of a pull-out further down the road report seeing dark shapes on the rock face. These are not the silhouettes of trees or the shadows of clouds. They are humanoid forms, seemingly clinging to the vertical stone, just beside the road's edge. The shapes are described as darker than the surrounding rock, like patches of wet tar or deep shadow. They appear to be in the motion, struggling, frozen in a perpetual, desperate attempt to climb or to hold on. They are most visible in the lashing rain and gloom, a chaotic tableau of anguish etched against the granite. They do not make a sound that can be heard over the gale. The defining characteristic of these apparitions is their relationship to light. When lightning splits the sky, illuminating the cliff face in a stark, blinding snapshot, the shapes vanish. For that fraction of a second, the rock is revealed as bare, wet stone. Then, as the afterimage fades and the darkness rushes back in, the dark shapes reappear in the same positions, continuing their silent, struggling vigil. It is this specific behavior, this disappearance in the light and return in the dark, that separates local myth from mere trick of the eye. Engineers and geologists have no explanation for the shapes. They point to strange mineral stains or patterns of water runoff that might become visible under specific storm conditions. But the consistency of the humanoid form, and the timing tied to the most violent weather, challenges a purely physical answer. This leads to the realm of place memory. The theory suggests that traumatic, energy-intensive events, especially those involving sudden terror and falling, can imprint upon a location. Especially those involving sudden terror and falling, can imprint upon a location. The Widowmaker Stones, soaked in the adrenaline and final moments of the workers, may act as a kind of psychic film. The storm provides the energy, the chaotic backdrop that mirrors the original conditions of the accidents. The dark shapes are not ghosts in a traditional sense, but visual echoes of those final, desperate instants, replaying when the atmosphere crackles with a similar violence. Their disappearance in the lightning flash is particularly poignant. It suggests they are creatures of the dark moment, the loss of grip, the plunge into the void. Absolute light, the flash of lightning or perhaps the moment of impact itself, obliterates them. To witness the Widowmaker Stones during a storm is to see a landscape remember its own creation. The road is a scar of progress. And these shapes are the pain that scar cost. They are a memorial written in shadow and stormlight. A reminder that some foundations are laid with more than concrete. They are mixed with sacrifice. The phenomenon offers no closure, no peace. No peace. The shapes cling forever because, in that place, that is all they were ever allowed to do. They vanish in the light because, for them, the light meant the end. They are a permanent, dark footnote to the engineering marvel. A haunting that appears only when the elements rage. As if the cliff itself must periodically show the price that was paid to bind the road to its side. On a high coastal trail, where the path is a slender thread between ancient forest and sheer cliff, there is a walk known for its beauty and its peril. By day, it is a stunning hike, offering panoramic views of the rugged shoreline below. But as evening mist begins to rise from the ocean, the experience of the path changes in subtle, chilling ways. The first sign is the cold. It is not a general drop in temperature. It arrives in isolated, intense patches. A hiker will be walking in the cool, damp evening air when they suddenly step into a pocket of profound, winter-like cold. It lasts only for the length of a few strides, a deep, penetrating chill that seems to emanate from the ground itself, before they step back into the ambient air. These cold spots are unpredictable, unmapped, and feel unnaturally focused. When the fog rolls in, thick and silent, the second phenomenon begins. Within the swirling gray, points of light appear. They are the soft, yellow glow of lanterns, seen at a distance through the trees or hovering over the path ahead. They are not steady. They wink in and out of existence, bobbing gently as if carried by someone walking. They seem to beckon, offering a point of reference in the disorienting whiteness. This instinct is the trap of the cold lantern walk. Those who follow the lights do not find a way out of the fog. Instead, the lights lead them subtly off the main, safe trail. The path underfoot becomes narrower, rockier. The sounds of the forest grow muffled, replaced by the distant, ominous crash of waves from directly below. The lantern glow always stays just ahead, luring the follower onward. Until they find themselves on an exposed, crumbling ledge. The cliff edge terrifyingly close, the light suddenly extinguished. Leaving them stranded in blank whiteness. With a deadly drop at their feet. A search and rescue volunteer named Leo had heard too many similar accounts from disoriented hikers. He decided to walk the trail at twilight with thermal imaging equipment, intent on mapping the alleged cold spots to see if they correlated with sinkholes or cold air drains from caves. His thermal camera registered the patches clearly, sudden blooms of blue in the green and orange landscape. They had no logical geothermal source. As the fog thickened, he saw his first light. It was a pale, floating smudge in his viewfinder, lacking a clear heat signature. It moved. Against his better judgment, and driven by a need to understand, he allowed himself to be drawn toward it. The light led him off the wide, graveled trail onto a deer track. The cold patches became more frequent. The thermal camera showed the path ahead was a ribbon of cold. The lantern light paused, as if waiting for him, then drifted further, toward the sound of the sea. Leo stopped. He was a man who knew this coastline intimately. The sound told him he was standing on the overhang above Devil's Jaw, a notorious and impassable cove. The light was not on any path. It was hovering in empty air over the cliff. He shut his eyes, turned his back on the glow, and carefully retraced his steps by feel. Until his boots found the solid gravel of the main trail. His historical research uncovered a tragic yet simple story. A century ago, this trail was the only access to a small, lower village. The community employed a lamplighter, an old man who would walk the path at dusk in all weathers, lighting a series of lanterns on posts to guide the fishermen home. One night, in a terrible storm, a section of the cliff path gave way. The lamplighter, and several of the posts, were lost to the sea. The village was eventually abandoned, but the route of his nightly duty remained. Leo believes the cold spots mark the places where the lantern posts once stood. A residual memory of the hollow metal poles sucking warmth from the air. The phantom lights are not malevolent. They are the echo of his routine. To follow them is not to be led astray by malice, but to be shown the way as it was, not as it is. The old path included the cliff that fell away. Leo now advises all hikers to carry a reliable GPS. And to treat any light in the fog as a hazard beacon, not a guide. He understands the cold lantern walk is not haunted by a ghost, but by a schedule. The cold and the lights are a faithful, tragic replay of a service that ended in disaster. Still trying to illuminate a road that leads into the void. The only safe response is to acknowledge the chill, ignore the light, and keep firmly to the modern, intact trail. Respecting the old path by refusing to follow it. The dragging sound is reported along a stretch of jagged stones that line a desolate coastline. The rocks are rough underfoot, and uneven, creating a natural pathway that stretches along the shore. At night, when storms roll in or fog blankets the area, visitors report hearing something heavy being dragged across the stones. The sound is slow, deliberate, and resonates through the ground, carrying clearly despite the roar of wind and waves. The phenomenon occurs without warning. One moment the night is quiet except for natural sounds, the whisper of the wind, the crash of waves, the distant call of birds or animals. Then comes the dragging, a weighty, grinding noise that moves with apparent intent. Hikers and explorers often notice the sound traveling behind them, keeping pace as they walk, yet no object or figure is ever visible. The sensation is immediate and physical. The vibration of the dragging carries through the soles of boots, and the sound itself seems to reverberate along the spine. Observers describe a growing awareness, a feeling that something is following, heavy and inexorable, yet elusive. The sound continues, moving with the listener but remaining unattached to any visible source. Turning around reveals only stones, shadows, and mist. The sound continues, moving with the listener but remaining unattached to any visible source. Fog and low light intensify perception. Shadows stretch unnaturally across rocks. And shapes appear in peripheral vision, only to vanish when looked at directly. The dragging sound seems to manipulate attention, drawing focus backward and making each step forward feel both urgent and measured. The combination of sound, shadow, and weather produces a sensory environment that is immersive and disorienting. Visitors report hearing the drag along dry stones, crisp and distinct, almost mechanical in weight. Each scrape or slide of the invisible object is deliberate, as though following a pattern. Attempts to locate the source produce nothing, the sound shifts to remain behind or parallel, maintaining the sense of pursuit without revealing form. The coastline itself contributes to the experience. The jagged stones amplify sound, producing echoes that travel along the shoreline and across cliffs. Waves crash with varying intensity, masking and accentuating the dragging in unpredictable patterns. Mist rises from the water, swirling around rocks, softening edges and blending with shadows. Together, these elements create an environment in which perception is heightened and ordinary judgment of distance and presence becomes unreliable. Observers describe a growing tension as the sound follows. The dragging is slow, deliberate, but continuous, producing a sensation of inevitability. Even when the pace of a hiker increases, the sound maintains its relationship, as if aware of movement and adjusting accordingly. It is impossible to outrun, evade, or ignore. The combination of auditory and tactile perception produces a profound awareness of presence that cannot be visually confirmed. The psychological effect is remarkable. Listeners report heightened alertness, a sense of being watched, and the impression of weight moving through space. The mind attempts to locate a source, creating anxiety and anticipation. Peripheral vision and hearing become more acute, the body responding instinctively to the suggestion of unseen mass. Even experienced hikers describe an unsettling mix of fascination and fear. Time seems altered in the presence of the dragging sound. Steps feel longer or heavier, minutes expand. And each scrape of the unseen object is measured and precise. Light and shadow shift unpredictably as mist moves, creating patterns that mimic motion. The combination of auditory cues and environmental distortion produces an immersive, almost hypnotic experience, where presence is suggested more than revealed. Despite repeated observation, the phenomenon remains unexplained. No object, animal, or person is ever found. The sound appears tied to the geography, responding to movement along the stones, yet obeying no known natural rules. Photographs and recordings often capture the ambient environment but rarely the sound itself with clarity, preserving the mystery for those who experience it firsthand. Visitors report a lingering effect even after leaving the area. Awareness of the dragging sound remains in memory, replaying in dreams or in peripheral attention. The coastline and stones themselves seem charged with the impression of weight and movement. As though the phenomenon imprints upon perception. The experience is both captivating and disquieting, a reminder that not all interaction with the natural world can be fully understood or explained. The dragging sound endures as a coastline of auditory mystery. Heavy movement across stones, following observers with deliberate intent, creates an environment where perception and imagination converge. Fog, shadow, and echo enhance the effect, making each encounter unique and immersive. Visitors leave with the sensation of weight, presence, and motion that defies ordinary explanation. A haunting rhythm that continues long after the night and the stones have been left behind. On a jagged, unforgiving coast known as the Iron Teeth, there is a place called Broken Mast Reach, where the sea churns with hidden currents. Lies scattered just beneath the surface. But one piece remains permanently above the waves. A single, massive section of splintered mast. Driven like a grim spear into a cleft between two barnacle-crusted boulders. But one piece remains permanently above the waves. It has stood there for over a century, weathered silver by salt and sun, a stark monument to the ship it once held aloft. During calm weather, the mast is a silent sentinel. But when storms gather and the waves begin to pound the shore, the reach awakens with sound. Above the roar of the wind and the crash of the surf, a new and distinct noise cuts through. It is the sound of snapping wood. A sharp, catastrophic crack that echoes off the cliff walls. It is not a single sound, but a series of them. As if the mast is breaking again and again in rapid succession. The sound of a great structure giving way under immense pressure. The noise is so clear, so acoustically separate from the storm, that it feels like a replay happening just seconds in the past. It is during these auditory phenomena that the visual manifestations are often reported. Witnesses, usually brave souls watching the storm from the high bluffs, claim to see shadowy figures around the embedded mast. These are not full-bodied forms, but dark, human-shaped silhouettes that move with urgent purpose. They are seen climbing the invisible rigging where the mast once stood, scrambling upwards as if fleeing a rising deck, or clinging to the spectral yards. Their movements are silent, a frantic pantomime against the raging backdrop of foam and spray. They appear only in the fleeting moments between lightning flashes, or in the deepest troughs of the waves, and vanish when directly observed, leaving only the broken spar and the relentless storm. The ship was the Aurora's Quest, a three-masted merchant vessel out of Halifax. Bound for Liverpool with a hold full of timber, it encountered a hurricane-force gale that drove it directly onto the teeth of this bay. The captain's final log entry, recovered later, described the sickening sound of the mainmast shattering as the ship heeled onto the rocks. While a handful of crew survived by clinging to wreckage, many were lost to the boiling surf, their last sight the collapsing web of sails and rigging. The broken mast, the largest remaining piece, became a local landmark and a grave marker. The stories of the storm sounds and the shadow sailors began with the lighthouse keepers who manned the now automated tower on the headland. They would report the distinct sound of breaking timber during southeasterly gales, long after the wreck had been picked clean by the sea. Later, fishermen and coast watchers added the tales of the dark climbers. Maritime historians and acoustic engineers have studied the site. They confirm that the specific arrangement of the rocks and the cleft holding the mast could act as a natural amplifier. The crack of a particularly large wave hitting a submerged timber, or the groan of the mast itself in its stone vise, could be reshaped into the illusion of snapping wood. The shadow figures are more easily attributed to pareidolia, the mind's tendency to see familiar shapes in chaotic patterns of spray and darkness. Yet, the consistency is compelling. The sounds are reported only during storms from the precise direction of the wreck. The shadowy climbers are always described in the act of ascent, never descent, a detail that matches the final moments of the Aurora's quest. To stand at broken mast reach during a storm is to witness a moment frozen in time, then violently rewound and replayed. The physical mast is a fixed point, a relic. The sounds are its memory, erupting into the present whenever the conditions match those of its demise. The shadow sailors are the echo of the crew's final, desperate struggle, an imprint of panic and survival instinct left upon the very atmosphere of the place. It is a haunting note of peace, but of perpetual crisis. The mast did not simply break once, a century ago. A ghostly rigging, forever trying to escape a sinking that has already happened. The reach holds not just a ship's bones, but the final, terrified second of its death, preserved and reenacted in sound and shadow whenever the old storm winds howl. At the edge of a quiet fishing village, a stone breakwater stretches its long, protective arm into the sea. It is a place for evening walks and solitary reflection, with the village lights at your back and the vast horizon ahead. Most walkers stop well before the very end, where the waves break over the slick, algae-covered rocks. But if you do venture to the final, flat slab of granite, you will often find you are not alone. It stands at the absolute terminus, where the man-made stone meets the chaos of the open ocean. The figure is always described similarly, a person of average height, clad in a dark, heavy coat, facing directly out to sea. It does not pace, it does not shift its weight, it does not react to the spray that occasionally mists the air. It is a statue of attention, a permanent fixture at the watching end. From a distance, it is easy to mistake it for another person enjoying the view. But as you draw nearer, its utter stillness becomes unnerving. The wind tugs at clothing that does not stir. This profound immobility is the first clue that something is amiss. The figure is watching, but it is not present in the way a living person is. Curiosity, or a simple, human desire to acknowledge a shared moment, often compels walkers to offer a gesture. A small, tentative wave. A nod. It is this act of attempted connection that triggers the phenomenon. The moment a hand is raised in greeting, those who have done it report a sudden, visceral flood of dread. It is a cold, sinking sensation that originates in the stomach and climbs into the throat, a primal alarm with no visible source. This dread is immediately followed by an overwhelming, non-negotiable urge to leave. Not to walk, but to retreat. This is the phenomenon. It is an impulse that feels less like fear and more like a deep, instinctual understanding. That you have made a mistake, that you have interrupted something profoundly private and eternal. People turn and walk away, quickly, without looking back. The earlier piece of the breakwater utterly shattered. The history of the village is one of the sea's bounty and the sea's cruelty. A century ago, a storm of legendary fury caught the entire fishing fleet unaware. The boats, seeing the danger, raced for home. The last boat, the Evening Star, was just minutes from the harbor entrance. A rogue wave caught it broadside. From the breakwater, the entire village watched, helpless, as it capsized and was swallowed. All hands were lost. The captain's young wife, Elara, had been standing on the breakwater, as she did every evening, waiting to see her husband's light. She witnessed the entire event. She continued to stand there, every single day at dusk. For the rest of her life, staring at the point where the sea took him. Until she herself passed away. An old woman frozen in a moment of young grief. This story is the heart of the phenomenon. It does not move because, in the essential truth of that moment, Elara was unmoving. The figure is not a ghost that interacts. The wave, the attempt to connect, is the critical error. You are not waving at a person. You are waving at a memory of waiting. At a concentrated point of loss. The psyche, upon realizing this dissonantia that it has tried to socially engage with a fragment of pure sorrow, reacts with a shock of existential dread. The urge to leave is a survival mechanism, a flight from the overwhelming, silent vacuum of Anathra's eternal grief. You are not being chased away. You are being shown, in the most direct way a feeling can be communicated, that you do not belong in that moment, that it is not yours to share. The watching end is therefore not a traditional haunting. It is a preserved emotional state. The figure does not mean harm. It is the shape of waiting for something that will never arrive. To see it is to witness love turned into a geographical feature. To wave is to foolishly try to hail a monument. And to feel the chilling reverberation of the loneliness it represents. It teaches a solemn lesson about the boundaries of sorrow. Some grief is so vast and so still that it becomes a part of the landscape. And the only respectful response is silent observation from a distance. Before quietly giving the watcher the wide berth it has earned. And leaving it to its endless, immobile vigil. At the edge of the world. On a remote stretch of coastline, there is a natural fortress of stone known as the Storm Clock Wall. Its unique acoustics and shape cause it to amplify the sounds of the sea, turning every crashing wave into a deep, thunderous boom that echoes for miles inland. But this wall has a far more peculiar property, one only revealed during the fury of a true gale. When the storm winds drive the waves against the base of the wall with enough force, a strange stillness descends upon anyone who shelters there. It is a stillness of time. Seconds seem to thicken. Minutes feel like hours. The frantic motion of the storm, the lashing rain, the violent spray, all appear to slow, as if viewed through a viscous lens. This is accompanied by a deep, physiological dread, a sense of being trapped not in space, but in a single, elongated moment of the storm's fury. Concurrently, timekeeping devices fail. Wristwatches with quartz movement stop dead. Mechanical watches wind down in moments, their balance wheels freezing. Digital displays flicker and go blank, or show a frozen time. Phones, even if kept dry and fully charged, report erratic times or shut down entirely. It is as if the very concept of measured time cannot withstand the atmospheric pressure of the place during a storm. A perceptual psychologist named Mara was studying the effects of extreme environments on human cognition. She equipped herself with multiple synchronized timers, a heart rate monitor, and a voice recorder. And waited in a protected crevice for a predicted squall. As the storm hit its peak, the world changed. The booming of the waves became a monolithic, all-consuming sound. She started her timers and began to speak into her recorder, describing her experience. She intended to speak for 1 minute. She spoke of the slowing rain, the agonizingly gradual collapse of each wave, the feeling of being embedded in amber. When she finally glanced at her instruments, her skin went cold. According to the digital timers, only 12 seconds had passed. Her own lived experience felt like 5 minutes. Her heart rate monitor, however, showed a normal, steady pulse, not the elevated spike of perceived panic time. She checked her wristwatch. It had stopped. All her backup timers showed different, frozen times. In that moment, cradled in the roaring stone, she felt the distortion viscerally. It was not an illusion. It was a condition. The storm and the wall were creating a pocket where time shed its uniform skin. Her subsequent research into the area's history revealed no great tragedy, but a simple, repeated human behavior. For centuries, this specific curve of wall was the last refuge for fishermen caught in sudden storms. They would drag their boats onto the shingle and huddle against the stone, waiting for the weather to break. Their entire world shrank to the wall at their backs and the tempest before them. Their only task was to endure, to wait, with no power to hasten the passing of the storm. They marked time not by minutes, but by the count of waves, by the slow, imperceptible shifting of the light, by the gradual easing of the wind. Mara developed a theory. The storm clock wall is not distorting time itself. It is amplifying a specific human experience of time, the experience of absolute, helpless waiting. The intense acoustic and tactile bombardment of the storm, focused by the wall, overloads the brain's normal timekeeping mechanisms, which rely on predictable sensory cues and internal rhythms. The brain, deprived of its usual metrics, defaults to a primal, dilated awareness, where threat and suspense stretch every moment. The stopped watches are a physical echo of this psychological state. A sympathetic failure of mechanical rhythm in the face of overwhelming, chaotic rhythm. Mara published a paper on sensory overload and temporal perception, citing the storm wall as a unique natural laboratory. She never mentioned the stopped watches in her data. Some correlations are best left as field notes. She now understands why the old fishing families speak of the wall with a kind of reverence. They do not see it as a cursed place. To shelter there in a storm is to be forced to surrender to a time that is not your own, to live entirely within the storm's duration. The wall reminds anyone who waits there that clock time is a fragile human construct, and that the world operates on older, more powerful rhythms, where a minute can last an eternity. The breakwater that breathes stretches along the edge of a restless sea. A long formation of stones built to protect the shore from relentless waves. Unlike other breakwaters, this one has a rhythm that cannot be ignored. Each stone appears subtly alive, rising and falling in tandem with the ocean. Visitors report feeling the structure pulse beneath their feet, as if the wall and the water share a single breath. Approaching the breakwater, the sound of the waves grows more complex. The crashing of surf against stone produces a deep resonance, amplified by gaps and crevices in the formation. The noise is at once familiar and uncanny, a combination of natural percussion and an almost organic vibration that seems to synchronize with footsteps along the stones. The effect is immediate, producing a sense that the structure is conscious, responding to movement and presence. The surface of the breakwater is uneven, shaped by decades of erosion, storms, and human intervention. Stones shift slightly beneath weight, amplifying the sense of motion and pulse. Observers describe a sensation of standing on living ground, each step producing micro-movements that resonate through the body. The rhythm of the ocean and the subtle rise and fall of the stones create a hypnotic experience, blending tactile perception with sound and sight. Fog often envelopes the breakwater, softening edges and blending the horizon with the sea. Visibility is reduced, and the stones appear to move more freely, the waves carrying mist across surfaces that glisten and shift. Shadows form along crevices and low points, appearing to breathe in unison with the rise and fall of the stones. Peripheral vision detects motion that cannot be pinpointed, heightening the sense that the breakwater itself is alive. Visitors report a physical response to the sensation. Heartbeats synchronize subtly with the pulse of the structure. And breath deepens as if the body is tuning to the rhythm of the wall and water. The tactile feedback of the stones underfoot, combined with the soundscape of crashing waves and distant echoes, produces heightened awareness. Observers describe a connection with the ocean and the stones. A shared cadence that transcends ordinary perception. Even in calm conditions, the breakwater continues its subtle motion. Small rises and falls, almost imperceptible, maintain a pulse beneath every step. The stones creak or shift quietly, resonating with internal vibrations amplified by contact with the ocean. Observers note that the effect is more pronounced when attention is focused, yet it persists even when casual. The breakwater seems to acknowledge presence, its rhythm unchanged but intensified by proximity. Mist and low light intensify the experience. Shadows lengthen across stones. And the interplay of light on wet surfaces creates the illusion of movement. The rise and fall of the stones becomes more apparent. And the pulsing rhythm of the ocean is mirrored in perception. Visitors report that stepping carefully along the wall produces a sensation that the breakwater responds to weight, adjusting imperceptibly in cadence with each step. The auditory experience is layered. Waves crashing produce low, rolling tones, while smaller stones shift and knock gently against one another. Wind passes through gaps, producing whistle-like notes. Together, these sounds combine with the tactile pulse to create a symphony of perception, an immersive experience where the senses are fully engaged. The breakwater communicates in sound, touch, and motion simultaneously. Observers often describe a meditative state while walking the breakwater. Time feels suspended, and awareness of ordinary surroundings fades. Each step, each breath, and each pulse of the stones aligns with the rhythm of the ocean. Mist, wind, and movement create a space that is both tangible and ethereal. The breakwater seems to exist in a liminal state, neither wholly structure nor wholly living entity, yet fully present and aware. Night heightens the phenomenon. Darkness deepens shadows, and the pulsing of the stones is amplified by absence of visual distractions. The ocean roars with greater intensity, and waves carry sounds that blend with the subtle creaks of stones shifting. Observers often feel that the wall is breathing in tandem with them, producing a sensation of intimate connection with both stone and sea. Even when leaving the breakwater, the sensation lingers. Observers retain the memory of the pulse, the subtle rise and fall beneath their feet, and the shared rhythm of the ocean and the wall. It is a place where ordinary boundaries between object, environment, and observer dissolve, creating an immersive experience that is both calming and uncanny. The breakwater that breathes endures as a location of sensory and perceptual mystery. Stones rise and fall with the ocean, the structure pulses beneath footsteps, and the soundscape reinforces the illusion of life. Mist, shadow, and tactile perception create an environment that challenges ordinary understanding of stone and water. Visitors leave with a profound awareness of the rhythm of the world around them, the pulse of the breakwater, and the unity of ocean, stone, and presence. Thank you, my dear friend, for braving these haunted storm-lashed breakwaters with me tonight. These stone arms were built to protect the shore. But they were forged through loss, danger, and sacrifice. The Atlantic does not forget those taken by its waves. And the breakwaters remember every storm, every scream, and every final step taken too close to the edge. If you ever find yourself walking Maine's coastline during a storm, remember these stories. Do not linger on the rocks. Do not follow lights in the fog. And never turn your back on the sea. Because the ocean is always watching. And sometimes, it reaches back. Rest well tonight. Keep the lights close. And until our next journey into the shadows, listen carefully. Because when the storm rises, the breakwaters are never empty.